Hello, I'm Jack, and this is my presentation on research. Let's go to slide 1. BASIS. This is the British Association of Sport and Exercise Science. BASIS produce the code of conduct of which all researchers planning to start a project must abide by in order to start their project or study. The code of conduct covers such areas as ethical clearance, informed consent and confidentiality, data protection and responsibility, competence, professional and personal conduct, and disciplinary procedures. The next slide. Ethical clearance. In order to start your project/experiment, you need to appropriate local ethics community of a community that is relevant to your research subject to review your project. This committee has the power to review and recommend changes to your proposed subject, such as an error in your method or safety. Without a committee's permission, you cannot proceed with your study. For example, if I was researching the effectiveness of peer flexibility training in young gymnasts, I would have to present consent forms to gymnast parents, as they're too young to sign them themselves, and my methods and qualifications in sport stretching. Next slide is safety. Your safety of your participants is key to your research. In order to ensure their safety, you must need to fill out a risk assessment on the environment and equipment you'll be using. You also need to know the medical history of your participants depending on the study. For example, if you're studying the effect on mood and how fast a person can run 50 meters in, you will need to complete a risk assessment on the track that they will be running on and the footwear and clothing they will be wearing. You also need to complete a PARQ or a similar form to discover their medical history in case of someone having, for example, asthma. So someone with asthma training could be there if the participant does want to continue with the study. Next slide. Importance of ethical and legal issues. There are three main important issues when it comes to ethical and legal issues. The first is to ensure the safety of the participants and yourself as the researcher. This means taking steps such as completing risk assessments and PARQs. The next is to make sure that either yourself or someone impartial person is trained to the relevance of your study. For example, there will need to be a trained football coach if the study involves football. Also, a key ethical issue is to keep the reputation of your own career and that of BASIS and that of the field within sport and exercise science which you study. For example, this could be keeping professional standards as Bible with being impartial. Implications of not being ethical. If you do not abide by the basic ethical and legal issues such as written in the BASIS Code of Conduct, there will be consequences and implications. This include tribunals, similar to court. This is where two parties, in this case one who broke the ethical legal issues. Tribunals can lead to fines, legal or written warnings, and you can be banned from producing or publicising your research in areas such as cell biology if your field is cell biology. Legal and civil procedures. You could be sued for your research, especially if your participant is hurt if something goes wrong. To avoid this, make sure you follow your code of conduct. BASIS measures to stop your research. This includes discipline hearings, which will first call you to a tribunal. Then they can temporarily or permanently put on hold your research, and finally, if it's serious stuff, they can suspend you or permanent expulsion. The first scenario. For example, this scenario is an investigation for maximum repeated sprints and lactic accumulation for adults with learning difficulties. For example, the researcher may use 4 mixed ability 18-year-old students to sprint 100 meters 15 times with 2 seconds in between. One legal issue is data protection. If the researcher didn't keep the results safe somewhere that only he had access to, the results and names and ages of the participants and even the signatures of the participants could be taken. The consequence of this is the researcher could be liable for both civil and criminal damages, such as the participant suing the researcher. Other consequences, such as BASIS calling you to a tribunal because you broke the code of conduct, and could lead to them permanently or temporarily stopping your research or suspending or even expelling you from your field. Tribunals can also lead to fines, written and legal warnings. The researcher will also be given a bad reputation to himself and the field he works in. A legal issue with this could not be informed consent if the researcher doesn't ask the parents or guardians for consent because the participants have learning difficulties and it may be hard for them to understand consent. So they may sign the consent form so that you can publish their name and results. The consequence of this is the parents and guardians can sue the researchers. The students didn't fully know what they were doing. Other consequences as being taken to tribunal basis and the participants of damages. Safety is an ethical issue because it could be dangerous for anyone without a lot of training to repeatedly sprint with such a short rest period. This could lead to the participants collapsing in exhaustion because having learning difficulties could make it harder for them to know when they need to stop running. One consequence of this is the researcher could be civil criminally liable if the students get hurt, for example collapsing and breaking a wrist. So the students could claim for damages on the researcher and the researcher would have to pay. The last ethical issue for this scenario is being biased or being partial on the test. If the researcher shows encouragement to only the students, it can affect the results. This is because the student is encouraged and they feel more confident and try harder. This is of course opposite for the students who don't feel encouraged and they will feel less confident and less likely to try. The consequence of this is that your reputation will be damaged as your results are corrupt, as the students are not given a fair chance. You have included yourself in the study and you are unbiased and not impartial. Next scenario. The next one is the effect of punishment on performance of basketball free throws percentages. The researcher may use 10 basketball players over the age of 15 and physically punish them if they miss a free throw shot. Data protection can be an issue if the researcher publishes the results even without the permissions of the participants. It could affect the participants themselves if a coach or scout sees them and they would be less inclined to select the player if they can't take free throws under pressure if badly performed in the test. The consequences, the participants could take the researcher to a civil court and claim personal damages as there could be a possible career damage. Not getting or not giving proper consent forms. If the researcher doesn't give a consent form or doesn't properly state what will be happening, in this example, no one would willingly sign up to the researcher knowing that there was physical abuse. A consequence of this is the basis calling the researcher to tribunal and breaking the code of conduct. Brave faces is study being stopped. Safety is a key in this test. Even if the researcher made the players take part in mild physical punishment such as running suicides, there is still a risk of collapsing of exhaustion and breaking a bone. The consequence of this could be basis take the researcher to tribunal for breaking the code of conduct again and suspended him from his work. The last issue for this scenario is by punishing the participants, the researchers putting themselves in the study, such as Philip Zimbardo did in the Stanford prison experiment. This would make their research impartial as he affects the results. The better or worse he treats the players will affect then their performance will vary. The consequence is that his reputation could be less credited and his research could be considered biased and not very useful for future studies. Next slide. This scenario is a study of attitudes to obesity in primary school children during physical education lessons. The researcher may look at an area of the highest obesity population, ask PE teachers from primary schools in what area in areas where obesity and ask PE teachers from those primary schools whether obese children's attitudes are positive or negative towards PE. Data protection is key for the study as it could be a problem if the researcher doesn't keep it safe, such as in the safe. This could lead to information of children being taken if there are any names mentioned. Also, reputation of PE teachers could be damaged as they don't want their opinions being said as unprofessional. This could lead to the PE teachers suing the researcher because they could get fired for these negative remarks. And the next issue is the researcher could have to send consent forms to every child's name mentioned, which they wouldn't know until the teachers were mentioned. This is a problem as you can't involve someone in a study without as their name without a consent signature from, in this case, the parent. The consequence of this is basis could be used for disciplinary hearing where your research could be suspended or for not asking consent. The next issue is, although physical safety is not a harm, psychological safety is at risk. If the children's names are mentioned, then they could be subject to bullying at school, which can lead to psychological harm. The consequence of this is the parents suing the researchers for damaging and now not following their code of conduct. And the last issue for this scenario is by picking all the teachers to the interview from one area, the researchers being biased as the results would only affect that area. This is a problem as the results will only be useful for future research in one area. Primary children's behaviours vary a lot. A child might hate PE in primary school but love it in secondary school. The consequence of this is the researcher's reputation may be invalid, and basis might prevent him be inclined to give his go-aheads to future research. The last scenario, an investigation of the role of cold vests in aiding recovery from maximal sprint intervals. A researcher may gather 5 university students that are 20 years old and make them sprint 100 meters 3 times with 10 seconds rest, then give them a cold vest to recover 5 minutes and then repeat until the participants feel very fatigued. While the problem is data protection, in that again it's not safe information could be released without their permission. As a consequence, you could be liable for not keeping the information safe. This means you can be taken to court or tribunal and could face fines and damages fees. The next issue is the consent forms for this study would involve deception. This is because there is a problem with no experience. This is a problem because if you have no experience in athletics, you would think sprinting 100 meters 3 times is easy, usually seeing Olympians do it on television. This would mean the participants don't fully know what could happen to them, such as torn ligaments and muscle injuries from sprinting repetitively. As a consequence of this could be the participants either sue the researcher or complain to basis who can suspend the researcher. The next issue is safety. Safety could become an issue because of the sprinting, which involves maximum heart rate. This could lead to someone with heart conditions or a past of heart conditions to suffer a heart attack during the test. The researcher should have a PARQ to fill in order to know if the participants are okay to take part. The consequence of this is they could face criminal charges in court if they had a heart attack. The last issue is the researcher could be biased towards some of the students. This is an issue because the researcher could look after one student more than the other by either giving a cold vest quicker or even giving them water as they feel like they're doing well, while the others won't be and be less inclined to try hard. A consequence of this is your results will be invalid as you have corrupted the researcher, which will decredit the reputation, making the study of the researcher less likely to be looked at. That's the end of the presentation, but I will show you the bibliography of all the quotes and pictures I've used. There's that one, and here's the second one. That brings us to the end. Thank you for listening, and I hope it was okay.